Welcome to the Both and podcast. My name is Ben Wilkoff, and
I am Jessica Rowling.
and on this podcast, we like to represent the both and perspective um, for education, mental health, gender and equity issues, and everything in between. So, um, what's going on for you this week?
I wanted to start with a couple of things I was thinking about when I listened to our first podcast in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Thought we did pretty well, being that, it's been 4 years.
Yeah.
But I noticed something when we were talking last week. I we were talking a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement, and we were having a lot of conversations about how we've been engaging in that. And I noticed I kept using the words the situation and they. I kept using these very broad and generic, nondescript words.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very interesting that I just thought it was interesting that we were talking about our progression in being anti racist educators and people. And just in listening to that, I was able to grow so much more because I thought, if I had thought about the things that I was going to be talking about, I would have just already known this is how I want to refer to this, or, I want to talk about the movement. I don't want to be talking about the situation. I was like, what does
The
that even mean?
situation.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like the talk. I don't know what it is. So, yeah, I was thinking about that a lot. And then um, I also thought that it was interesting talking about like sides versus spectrum. You were talking
Mm-hmm.
about, they don't have to always choose one side or the other, and the idea of making time for the conversations. And
Hmm.
it seemed like we kind of kept reflecting on the past few years and if we had made more time for these conversations, or if we had stopped and really like entered some of the I think entered some of the spaces that we were in feeling more sure of ourselves and sure of our values, and that we could represent them in our jobs.
Right.
um, just all those things. I just thought it was really interesting. We kept saying, yeah, we never made time for it. And I always think about that, I don't have time. You have to make time. So I want to make more time for the conversation. So I'm glad we're having one now.
Yeah, that works out nicely. It seems like a super convenient uh, to have a conversation um, and make that time. Uh, yeah, I have certainly been reflecting on the conversation from last week, and especially as the situation has evolved. Um, and more than anything, looking at it through the lenses of my people. Kara has, for a long time, struggled with her own black identity. So she is half black, and her father, I think, because she didn't go to live with him until later in life, was not as responsible for her identity as as someone of color. She certainly identifies that way, but she was told by her whole wife side of the family um, that essentially you're more white. She was told that all the way up through middle school where she lived, and it has become, I think, something that she internalized so much that you know she didn't realize that she was suppressing it. She didn't realize that it was something that was quite so acute. But she started wearing her hair or brushing out her hair naturally for the first time, I think, in I don't know, ever. Um,
Like you've
and
never seen it like that before?
I mean, like, she would do it where she would pick it out as not quite a joke, but like for a special occasion where it was like, oh, I want big hair, and so I'm just gonna go all the way. Um, but she's been brushing it out,
But
and I
that
have
was not
never.
authentically Kara showing
Right.
up in spaces.
Correct. And so it has been really interesting to sort of see that's how she wants to play around with her own racial identity and in relationship to all of these people who um, are protesting, people who are dying, people, and does she see them as her people that she is a part of? Does she see herself as separate? And so we've been talking a lot about that. We also watched the Black Klansman, the Spike Lee movie, which is actually set in Colorado. It was the first black police officer from Colorado Springs, and he sort of infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan in Colorado Springs, posing as a white man on the telephone, and then like had another white police officer, or actually Jewish, but white looking at least, um, police officer sort of posing as someone who could be a member of the Klan. And so it was a really, and there is this whole crossover into like the last 10 minutes of the movie are like highlighting Charlottesville, which it came out a couple of months after that happened, and so it really sort of put a button on it. But obviously, those things are so fresh right now. I was like, I didn't get a chance to see this in the theater, and so we watched it together. And so it's bringing up all of these things, but I want to like you were saying, not talk about the situation, but talk about the ways in which the people I know and love are reacting to it, living through it, experiencing it. Right. So it was a very, I think, different kind of week than what I was anticipating, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Something that might not make sense for people who don't know, Kara is who to you?
Oh, yeah, she's my wife of 15 plus years. So certainly knows a lot about me and my progress, but we talk about all of the things. So yes, if I mention my wife or partner or just Kara, that's who that person is in my life. So
One and the same.
one and the same. That
In
is correct.
addition to many other fantastic things that
Many
she
other
does.
things that she does, she is all of those things.
Um, I had a really, really cool experience, even though this week in general was two thumbs down.
The
I
pits.
it just was the worst. That's not true, but it was bad. I I don't know if you remember back when I was taking the light rail to work downtown and I was playing around with blogging and I started doing light rail learnings. And I
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
was
do remember that. Yep.
just like trying to write while I was on the train, keep it to just like micro blog, have to be done before I get off the train, that kind of thing. So I was at the laundromat the other day
Sure.
and I've been, well, needing to go for many weeks now and I've been wanting to try a new laundromat. Um, just tiny side note, it was very interesting. I was trying to find a laundromat between my home and south of my home. So I live in Aurora, and I was trying
Right.
to head towards South Aurora because I had another errand that I needed to do down there. And there are zero laundromats anywhere in
Right.
really any of the areas south of my house.
Right.
And just it, like you were saying, like I've never noticed that before, but given the circumstances and what's top of mind for me, just seeing the map and seeing all of the dots around northern Aurora and then over into Denver, it was just very stark and obvious to me. And so I was also thinking about how cool would that be as any number of ways to learn more about your community and to understand Like I didn't know about redlining until a couple years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
find that absolutely fascinating. Um, so yeah, I just thought it was really interesting that you have to go into certain neighborhoods, and then I wonder, well, what are the other correlations between like the services that they offer in those communities and how how many food banks and churches and nonprofits are there. I just think it would be interesting to see that data represented in a different way. So it's kind of cool. In any event, at the laundromat that I went to,
Right.
uh, rave reviews on Google Maps.
Oh, good.
Um, so if you're in the Colorado area, go to Laundry on the Facts. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I met Armani, who's the owner, and he is from um, East Africa, and he owns the laundromat, runs the laundromat. He started chatting me up and telling me all about the things that he's been doing here and his philosophy on life and raising his kids, on marriage. He had a lot of ideas about marriage that he wanted me to know. Okay, I'll listen to your ideas about marriage. I didn't tell him that, I was already married for 18 years and I'm
Right.
good.
Yeah.
But. So Armani um, was telling me that basically, I mean, it seems like his mission in life was to, one, is to take care of his family, his children,
Mm-hmm.
and to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that he's present for them. He actually was in real estate and flipping houses, and he was doing investments and all kinds of different things. And he said, no, I had to stop. My kids needed me. That's more important. So that's why I have the laundromat now, because now I can be a full-time dad. I can come and go out to the school whenever I need to. But he was saying that in addition to all this fathering that he's doing, he basically just tries to help people and
Mm-hmm.
does not judge at all, doesn't question it. Like, I see a person in front of me who needs help. Let's see. Like, this was literally his stance on it was, well, I don't know, let's see. I don't need the money. So he gives people just like $100 bills. And when he hires someone to work at his laundromat and they have an incident where they steal from him,
Mm-hmm.
he hires them again. And then when they have another incident, he's still standing there talking to me about all of the things that have transpired since then and how like this person is, doing really well, they have an apartment. And he had all these different stories of really just kind of random encounters that, chance things that have come in front of him. And because he was able to, he's put some money towards it
Right.
and he hasn't expected anything in return. And doing that, sometimes it's worked out and sometimes it hasn't.
Right.
But he still says, I don't need it. And like if they needed it more, then they needed it more. He says that when he goes home to visit his family, because his mom lived here for a while, and then as she got older, she said, it's too big, it's too much, I need to go back to our village. So she is back there and he gets to go visit pretty often, but he said that, the difference in money is just to the point of like, he is embarrassed for the people in his village to know his status or what amount of money he's able to just share
Send
with
home.
them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's like, but I really want them to have it and I don't need it. And it
Right.
was just so interesting to hear like how he has grappled with these things and how he has just taken this approach that I've never really encountered anybody
Yeah. That's
who's
fascinating.
taken that way of helping people. It was really cool.
Hmm.
So props Armani.
Yeah. Props are money. And how did you come to have this this conversation?
Well, the reason that I went to this laundromat is because it had rave reviews and the comments were saying the owner's so great, he was so wonderful, he had this conversation with me. It was just like person after person talking about how great the owner is.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's kind of part of why I'm going to the laundromat right now. Like
Other
I
than
can't
getting your
necessarily.
clothes clean, right?
Well, there's that. I have a washer and dryer hookup in my house. But other than that being a large expense for me right now, I have actually just chosen to go to the laundromat because I
Right.
want that experience and I want to. I just think it's a really great way to meet people in the community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's why I picked that one because I thought, well, this community sounds great. And I was actually a little sad. I was getting ready to go and I was like, man, guess the owner's not gonna, I'm gonna have to come back. The
Yeah,
owner
yeah, yeah,
hasn't
yeah.
come. And then he came and we had, I don't know, we probably talked for like an hour.
That's
It was
amazing.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a um, that's a special experience. I feel like it's not super common. I do think that there are some interesting things that have happened during the pandemic. For me, I find myself going out of my way to talk to people, especially when I'm behind a mask, like to try and connect further because it can be fairly isolating when you can't see my mouth, and so how do you like you overcompensate, right,
Hmm.
to have those conversations, and so I do think that that's a really interesting approach to sort of put yourself into places. I mean, that would just scare me so much to talk to somebody like that in terms of feeling like I'm imposing upon them, feeling like but it is so worthwhile in so many ways um, to try and uncover those relationships that would never otherwise happen, right? Um, that would never exist otherwise. And so that's really cool. That's really cool.
Will you say a little bit more about, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but you just were saying that you mentioned something about like not putting yourself into that situation or like you wouldn't have felt comfortable seeking that out. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I am a I mean, we are both introverts in many ways, but in terms of uh, the fear that I have around I think being fully human with someone that I don't know, I am far more guarded. But it comes up all of the time when we are in the car and someone is on the side of the road asking for money or asking for food or things like that. Where it is something that I grew up with a lot, where my parents said don't make eye contact, that kind of stuff, don't and really to this day do not treat uh, you know the homeless um, and sort of homelessness and homeless people the way that a I think the way that their self professed religion and sort of values would treat them. And so that was always like a very incongruous sort of thing where it's like we do this thing and they do this thing, and those don't meet together. Um, Kara has some really good stories and experiences with her mother, making sandwiches and driving around their rural town and giving them out to folks who were very clearly in need, and has modeled that for our children a lot. Where we can give what we can, and especially if we have food in the car, that's sort of the first thing that she's reaching for. But those moments of it isn't the I am in a car, right? So I have this privilege and status, and you are outside of the car and are pedestrian and have a perceived different status. It is far more like I am afraid of looking at myself in some of those moments and saying like, why is it that I am so terrified to talk to humanity and to have that conversation, talk to other people. And a laundromat is clearly a far different thing, where you're there for at least a little while. Like they have your clothes held hostage a little bit. Um, but at the same time, it is those moments. I do not typically put myself in the uncomfortable situation of feeling like I would like to understand. I would like to hear the story, because it feels, like it feels difficult, and that goes for all types of strangers to me. That is not specifically like where I can observe the socioeconomic status difference, quite so clearly as that. Um, but that is something that I have been trying to unpack and trying to figure out. Because yeah, it's okay to be an introvert and it's okay to not, want to talk to people. But if the reason you don't want to talk to people, or the reason that I don't want to talk to people, is because there is a judgment that I am making about who they are and what their story is, then that's not okay with me. And that is something that, like I do want to tackle and do want to change. And so I have, in the past, I would say a couple of years, tried to figure out, opportunities to challenge my assumptions more than anything, right? Like, when I am looking at others, right? Everyone else is an other when you think about it, right? Like everyone else is different than you. And when you make decisions and judgments about others and then you counteract, you try and tell yourself, okay, so what is the alternative story that I could tell myself about this that would let me have that conversation and challenge the direct assumption? There's a lot of anti-bias and anti-racist work that I think is important to do all of the time, but especially when you are looking at assumptions, that I'm sort of making about different people, that I see. One of the biggest things that I've been thinking about this week are assumptions that I'm making about um, the people who are being canceled. So cancel culture is this big controversy, and we should or shouldn't cancel people, and but how is it that I can see them complexly enough? How can I see even someone that I truly hate and think has done irreparable damage to our country, like our president? Um, like how can I see him more complexly, if there is such a thing, right? Like he is very one note, and all of those kinds of things, right? But how do you see all of the people complexly enough? Um, and so how do you go about that? So there's a lot there, obviously, that I'm trying to unpack and figure out. But it can't just be that I have my bias, I'm unpacking it, but only in one direction, right? Like bias towards people from the South, or bias towards people who have an affinity for, cultures that I don't understand. How can I unpack all of those things and dissect them, without just being like, well, everything is okay, and just everyone can do their own thing and that's all right. So anyway, there's a lot there, but definitely that there are parts that make me uncomfortable, and I want to find ways of figuring out where that discomfort come from and how to make that better.
Yeah, I think that's really common to have sort of those conflicting beliefs and behaviors. And I think that a lot of times, we don't address, like, really and truly, we don't dig deep enough and go back far enough to say, well, why do I feel this way? Because I think a lot of people go only to the level of, why do I think this? And if
Mm-hmm.
I'm not thinking something in particular, then, it's nothing I need to worry about. Whereas I think a lot of what's coming to light now is that, well, actually, if you're complicit, that is a huge problem. If you're unaware, that is a huge problem, right?
Right.
So I think it's really interesting, that idea of, what did my parents say to me, or what have I heard, and maybe I don't think a particular thing when I see a certain group of people, or when I experience a certain, if I have a certain experience, but am I feeling something in that experience, or like you're pointing out, do I feel something, and I'm not seeking out an experience to challenge that? Because I think that's the only reason that I really enjoy those kinds of things, like not having to lug my laundry and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff, but I love the experience of lugging my laundry and being really frustrated by that, and thinking, oh my gosh, there are single mothers who do this with their children
Right.
every week. And then I start going down that path of like onesies, and how do you even keep enough clothes in the house for the baby? Like, just all the things. And then I do that, with a lot of different situations, and I think, geez, I'm very fortunate. I'm very grateful. Like, I have the time, the space, the money,
Yeah.
I can do all those things. But there are definitely a lot of times where I'm going into a situation, and then that's where I realize, oh, this is something that's coming up from my white childhood in Maine, or
Right.
this is something that I've heard from generations of the men in my family, and I have never questioned it. I just, like, we don't realize how much we internalize some of those things, and it becomes part of us, but
Hmm.
there's still that cognitive dissonance, because it's not actually that authentic part of us. It's just sort of that part that's hanging out that we haven't chosen to like look at and then say, yeah, I'm good with this part and I'll keep that. Thanks.
Yes. Um, yeah, and I do think that there is a lot there for figuring out the self, um, and figuring out which parts of the self are true, which parts are stories that we just tell ourselves about ourselves, right? The the way in which we see the world, and which parts are worth holding on to, which parts are worth letting go. Did you see the canceling of JK Rowling this week?
No, what does that mean? Tell me more about this cancel culture and all this business. I need the lingo. Explain.
Yeah. So, I mean, mostly right wing folks talk about cancel culture, but it really does exist where somebody does a thing that is quote unquote not woke, and they get canceled by the internet, right? I mean, the worst cases are folks like Harvey Weinstein, or um, you know Jeffrey Epstein, or looking at folks who say racist kinds of things, and it's like, you are canceled. You can now no longer work. Kevin Spacey, right? Um, and J.K. Rowling this week, and she has talked about this some, but a little bit. She sent out a tweet this week saying, um, there was an article that said, there was something happening for people who menstruate. And she took offense to this, saying, I think there's a word for people who menstruate. And like, she was trying to, in a jokey way, come up with, like, is it woodman, or like waterman? Like, there's something in there. Like, what is it again for people who menstruate? And making a joke essentially around the idea of, um, inclusive language, right? And she has had she's apparently been doing lots of research about gender and sexuality, but specifically around a biological sex and or the biological sort of standard traditional way of sexing children and having um, not having the ability to claim to be a gender when you have not transitioned to like all of those kinds of things that really are about trans rights and the ways in which people see themselves in the world and go through gender dysphoria and all of those kinds of things. And so she ended up, she was canceled after that tweet because everybody just piled on and said, you're terrible. I want to burn your books. Like all of these things that, I mean, mostly that women get called more than men, but at the same time, like it is. So there's a lot of misogyny that happens in cancel culture too. Like if a woman says something bad, quote unquote bad. But anyway, she wrote this very long blog post, which she is almost exclusively when she writing about Harry Potter and very sort of happy things, other than like some tweets here and there. But she wrote a long post where she talks about being a survivor of sexual abuse, physical abuse at the hands of her first husband, and talking about how essentially she would be afraid of men claiming to be women, right? So trans women coming into female spaces and causing everyone to be afraid and those kinds of things, like the typical fear that happens inside of what I would say like people who only understand the biological sex and the way of defining sex as biology. So people still are very much up in arms, but she wrote a very well sort of argued. It just isn't. It isn't inclusive. She talks about like trans women are women, right? But we can't be pushing people to become trans women. Like she goes off into talking about like groups of or she actually talks about groups of girls who want to transition to female to male, and like all deciding at once that they want to do this, and she was like finding that suspect and all of these other things. And so that writing, the way that she was articulating things, it makes me think about, she is a person that I have for many years, looked up to as someone who created something that I very much admire. Creating a culture around that thing that I really like, and yet that viewpoint and that way of looking at it is not my favorite, and is also like complex, right? Like she is not just one thing. How do I look at her? And so it comes around to this idea of what does both and mean to me? How can I look at someone in a both and kind of way where it is I am both saying I hate the things that you are saying, and there is more to you than those things, and you are not the worst thing that you said, and I don't have to cancel you just because you believe something different to me. Can I hold on to those things and allow that within myself? So I've been contemplating all of that, but that's a long-winded way of saying that's what happened this week around JK Rowling. And she got canceled by some people, and then other people said she's great. So it's I don't know what to do with
I
that.
I am a devastated Hufflepuff. I did not, unfortunately, become aware of JK's very, very strong opinions
Mm-hmm.
that she posts publicly
Right.
until, oh gosh, maybe just the last couple of months. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as you're talking is what, like the first, what you just said are really good questions. I don't think about any of those things until I ask myself, like, what is my responsibility as a role model, as an educator? Like, it doesn't take this long, but it's essentially like, if my fourth graders saw me doing this, or if I recommended this to them, if they went and did it because they saw me, like, I just kind of go down that path because I feel that there's a difference between modeling for our students and for our youth and really just humanity in general at
Right.
this point.
Yeah.
I think we're like really needing a lot of modeling. But I think that it's hard for me to continue to stand behind something that I know will so strongly influence children when it's in their hands because it so
Mm-hmm.
strongly influenced me and has done the same with my students. And I just keep thinking about something that, last week we were talking about our friend Laura. So Laura's wife, Galen, posted something on her social media saying, like, essentially, I would not exist in JK's world. If I were in her, if she had her choice, I would not exist. It's not possible for me to see myself in her world. And I thought that was very interesting because, especially now, we're talking so much about representation is so important, and we need to be not just seeking out, but elevating those voices that we're not hearing enough of. And I just can't stand behind something. If she just could be quiet about it, it would be a lot easier for me. It really would because I do think that those questions that you are asking, they can go either way. I have a lot of I think I have a lot of times where I sort of choose to create that division between the person and their creation, or the artist and their music. I think that it's when someone is now a role model and you are using that to sway people,
Right.
that's a problem for me.
Yeah. She is using her authority and her voice um, to espouse beliefs that she holds, but that I think are certainly detrimental to lots of folks. I'd encourage you to read the post that she wrote because I do think that there is like some nuggets in there that we may want to tease out and talk through. But yeah, I am I do struggle a little bit. Kevin Spacey was one of my favorite actors. Mostly since Usual Suspects and American Beauty. Like that was certainly something that I really. But I can't see him the same way. Certainly, as a sexual predator. And I can't do that. Um, I'm more interested in so I can't see JK's work in the same way that I did, right? Like that's not possible. But can I see her as a fellow human being who is worth something, right? Like who is worth listening to and thinking about, whether or not I agree with those things. Are people who I believe are wrong, are they worth listening to and talking to? You know, the one of the podcasts that we've been listening to, I was talking about maybe Adi Ashanti. He is a teacher out of San Francisco, or the Bay Area, I should say, and he has an approach where for a day, what if before you said anything to someone in your head, you said "I love you" to them, like in your head, and how would that change the way that you interact with them? And so if you are able to do that, what would that mean for every interaction that you have on Twitter, on in real life? Like if you said that because they are a fellow human being who is worth something, right? Their life also matters, right? It it is something that is valuable, um, and that they have value, an innate value. How would we treat each other differently? How would I treat someone else differently, even if I disagree with them, right? And um, I don't know quite how to do that. But like the other definition that I was playing around with in terms of both and, because I really want to like figure out why I'm so compelled by that title continually. It's like both sides of the brain and the heart, right? Like, can I think about it with both sides of my brain and put my heart into a decision that I'm making about it? How do I don't know. I mean, it is continually unpacking these things, right? But how do I look at my fellow humans as a fellow human, and not see them as like demon spawn and like just want to, like, oh, I can't read your stuff. I think it's the worst. Like, how do you make peace with that? I guess.
That makes me think about a lot of things, and this may not make sense, but it makes perfect sense in my head. Um, and one of the things that it makes me think about is like with both and the idea that everybody can see themselves in that experience. Or, when I was listening to our conversation last week, we were talking about the importance of being seen. And today I was listening to Brene Brown has a podcast, and I was listening to the episode of Unlocking Us with Tarana Burke. It was fantastic. I was just writing and writing and writing so many great quotes. But the thing that really stuck out was that they were talking about, if you can't hear me, then you can't see me, and how those two things are connected. And then how, even beyond that, how everybody has their own experience, but we have to make sure that we're leaving, not just leaving space, but holding space for their experience. And the idea that, we need to start letting people have their truth and stop taking someone's truth and putting it through our experience before we validate it, connect with it, whatever it is. And this, we we need to stop taking other people's experiences, or other people's truths, and putting them through our experience and our lens. Because if I'm filtering what you're telling me as your truth through all of my stuff first, and then I'm looking at your truth, I'm now deciding whether it's true or not. I'm figuring out all the reasons that I'm going to tell you it's not true because it's not my truth. Like, it's automatically putting us on two sides of the conversation instead of, hey, we're standing next to each other as two humans. But that idea that we have to just listen to people and then be okay with that. That's their truth. You can share your truth, but the way that people often, quote, connect these days is, they think they're empathizing, or they think that they're showing compassion, but what they're really doing is invalidating the other person's truth or experience. And this came up a lot for me, this past week, because I was thinking about, how do you honor. So I was thinking a lot about trauma, and trauma is so different, and abuse recovery is so different for every single person. And so how, when it's so individual, and it can look so different. I mean, years, months, anything in between, forever. And so it was just really interesting for me to think about, like, how do we hold space for survivors and victims and be able to listen to their truth and just let it be the truth. Because sometimes that's all that people are looking for. Like all the times that I was seeking out help, I thought I was seeking out help, but if I had even just received validation, that would have been huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a powerful statement around hearing somebody else's truth without filtering it through your own. Um, when you are when you are having that conversation, and I'd like to hear a little bit about, and maybe it's not a conversation, but I'd like to hear a little bit about the moment earlier this week where the people were fighting in your neighborhood. Um, and like clearly that is some truth that was being laid down on sort of both sides of that. How did you approach that without letting it be filtered by your own experience?
Well, I'm laughing because I think the first answer is I didn't. Um,
Sure.
I I very I very clearly was experiencing something in the moment and also being, I wouldn't say I was triggered, but I was definitely, there were moments where I was having a trauma response that was, it fit in the situation I was in, but it was not fueled by that situation. It was coming from a much deeper
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Um,
So what
so
what what happened
to
first?
back up,
Yeah.
I happened to overhear my backyard neighbor making some very, very loud comments at, I don't know, it was after midnight. And this is something that has gone on pretty much since I've lived here, so a couple of years now, to the point where I have probably been overly accommodating because I'm conflict averse,
Yeah.
or I was. Um, and so I'll shut the doors, I'll shut the windows, I'll do all the things, the white noise, while he's out there till 3, 4 in the morning carrying on, whatever. And I don't really care for a lot of the things that I overhear, and some of them have been offensive, but I let it go. I couldn't let this one go because it was so blatantly racist. And this week of all weeks,
Right. Yeah.
I couldn't. So I was getting ready to go to bed, shutting the doors, and I overheard this, and I honestly, I mean, if you know me, I don't do anything unless I think about it.
Right. Yeah.
I did not think at all. I mean, I really just jumped into action, and I basically just hollered over the fence and said, "Hey, can you please be quiet, especially with the racist comments?" And in retrospect, I could have started with, "Can you please be quiet?" Um, and I'm glad that I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
because maybe that would have diffused the situation and it would have de-escalated and gone nowhere. But then I wouldn't have known that I live next to such a, well, I'll let people decide. I don't
Yeah.
like to see. This is what I'm telling you. Like yeah, I have feelings. Um, so in any event, it instantly turned into this white man standing on his deck, screaming at me, calling me. Are we able to cuss? Are you gonna bleep? Like, what's the protocol here?
I don't know. We can
Okay,
we can
well, I'm
decide
gonna pick,
later.
and now you're gonna have to handle it.
Yeah.
He called me a bitch multiple times.
Right. Yeah.
He called me the C word. That was really fantastic.
Yeah. That
Um,
sounds great.
yeah. And it was just so interesting because all I was saying was, please don't be loud and shouting
And
racist
racist.
things in the
Yeah.
middle of the night. Like, I'm not asking you to change your opinion. I'm not telling you anything at all, except for you are impacting my life right now. You are impacting
All of these other
potentially
people. Yeah.
the people around us and also our society. So, no more. So it turned into, I mean, mostly him screaming at me and me saying, "Don't call me a bitch," and really just like setting my boundaries every time. And all that created was him saying other ridiculous things to me. I mean, at one point, his mother came out to get him to go in the house, and he was, I can't make this up. He was screaming, "She started it. She started it." So
How
I felt,
old do you estimate that this person was?
well, he told me that he built that house with his two hands and has lived there for 30 years. So I'm guessing he's in his 50s ish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at one point, I couldn't tell. The argument kind of kept changing. But he said either he's not racist because he was in the Marine Corps, or he's
Right.
allowed to be racist because he was
Because
in
he
the
was
Marine
in the
Corps.
Marine Corps. Probably both.
Probably both, I think, whichever one is convenient for him.
Right.
But yeah, it was just so interesting. I mean, this man like yelled at me, "Nobody in the neighborhood likes you. White yoga, bleep, bleep, bleep." And I was like, wow. And then the person he was talking to stood up and happened to be a black man. So then the neighbor and the friend started arguing, and it was just really heartbreaking to me, honestly, that his friend was almost pleading with him. Like, you need to understand that it does matter. No,
Yeah.
it does matter. Like, I heard the panic in this man's voice when the sirens were in the distance, and he was telling his friend, if they're coming here, that's a problem. I have a family. I don't need this. I'm trying to raise a family. Like, and the response to the friend was, they can't come in my house. Let them try. This is my problem. It was just so appalling.
Hmm.
And he kept screaming, "Let her call the cops. Let her call the cops." And I was not screaming because I was trying,
Right. Yeah.
like, I really
De-escalate.
didn't
Yeah.
want, anything to come of it other than just, this
Like
is not
shut.
okay in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
But it was, yeah, it was just back and forth and back and forth, and so many unbelievable, ridiculous things that had no basis whatsoever in the conversation, quote, conversation.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that was the first time that I have. Well, it's interesting, is last week we were talking about sort of some of the first conflict that we've been involved in
Yeah.
that has been, would you say, racially motivated or
Yeah, I mean that the
related?
subtext is certainly of a racial nature, and that the overtones, um, clearly this person is simultaneously trying to be like who they believe themselves to be, right? Like they want to be free from any judgments from other people. Like, I'm just going to be who I am, but is also then worried that you are going to think that they are a racist, or worried that like there is some saving face, and that's why they are so angry, right? It's like, how dare you call me on my stuff, right? Because uh this is fine, right? So I
That's
mean
interesting
that's
that you say that, actually, because one of the things that came up was he continued to talk about how he is very open and he can't possibly be racist because he has parties, and the language that he was using to describe the things that he believes make him just, I love everybody. First of all, the fact that he just, I'm not racist, I love everybody. Come on. But he can. I mean, you clearly aren't
yeah.
educating yourself on things. But the things that he was, the language that he was using to describe himself was racist. It was, a lot of it was sexist. It was completely inappropriate. Most of
Right.
it was unfounded. And it just occurred to me that people will, like you said, like, people will so strongly hold and fight for something, and they're not really even sure what they're fighting for except being right.
Yep.
I'm right, so I'm going to prove it to you, even if it turns into like us just being completely immature and saying things that have nothing to do with this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I would see that very much reminiscent of the way that my children fight with me. And it's like, we have gone so far down a path that we're no longer talking about anything that matters. Like, it is just, I am trying to save face, or I am trying to prove that I am right, or I am trying to, sort of be myself. Okay. Just let me be myself. And even if that self has been wholly unreflected upon, and I don't know. There is certainly a truth being spoken there, but the words are not where the truth is. Um, and so that's something that I have to learn to listen for with our middle child, who you know very well, Tobias. But he, when he screams at you, he is not those the words that he is saying are not the words that you actually need to hear. The things that he is not able to say, the things that he is specifically, says after he has calmed down, like those are the ones that are the real words. Like everything else is, I'm at an 11 and I can't come down. Like I can't get to anywhere. Like I can't see anything but this. And um, and so that's also what I'm trying to figure out, right? Like how do you hear the real words that someone is saying rather than the words that are just coming out of their mouth? And I feel like we have had to do that a lot in politics recently, where what is the real thing that what is the real message that you are hearing? I've been reading a lot on Juneteenth and uh, the Tulsa massacre, um, because Trump is making his first mega rally back in Tulsa on Juneteenth, on June 19th. And so the uh, the subtext there, like the thing that he is communicating, and that I think some people want him to be communicating, is that we are going to do this anywhere, and this is who we are, and like believe them that they are the racists who we think they are, right? But it isn't the event on the calendar that is the real message. It is everything else that goes along with that, right? And so I don't know, like how do we hear the real message without resorting to like conspiracy theories and things like that? Because
Well,
I think that
I
that's
have one idea.
yeah.
I think mostly just because I'm fixated on all the things that I was hearing this morning on that Brene and Tarana Burke podcast. Um, but one of the things that Tarana Burke was talking about is, so she is a survivor of sexual violence, and it happened when the first time that she was a victim, she was about 6 going on 7. And she started a sort of like a youth leadership program, and she was trying to focus on empowering girls to be leaders in their communities, and to be able to go out and just really be confident in creating change and making change elsewhere. And one of the things that she was talking about was that she realized that there had to be a lot of trauma healing that had to happen, and that basically she had to teach the girls how to trust themselves, how to like really understand who they were outside of the thing that mostly the shame that they were carrying, and that she said it's impossible if the people who are trying to help you don't understand what survival looks like, they won't be in a position to actually help survivors. So when you were talking about, how do we really hear those messages and really, I think sometimes it's almost like, how do we internalize to a level that allows us to have compassion, or to, take that connection to the next level. I think a lot of it is just recognizing or learning about. I asked a friend of ours this week. I have been hearing, I'm here to help. Let me know how I can help. And I haven't really known how to ask for the help that I need. And I finally said it would really help if you could learn about trauma recovery, because then you will be more educated when you're talking to me, and you can sort of help guide me in conversation, so that I don't have to carry that burden and that load, right? So I think that even just being able to recognize if you don't know what to do, and creating those spaces for it, I will forevermore, I will only say, I don't know, and then ask something so that I can listen, unless I've had a personal experience with it. Like, if it's not my personal experience, my lips are sealed. Like, I don't want to talk about anything that I haven't personally experienced, because I've been so positively impacted by other people's firsthand experiences, and hearing from them, and then being able to take that, to the next experience or person, interaction that I have.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Um, Trying to relay something that is like tangentially related is not helpful. Uh, it's not, and I think that I probably do that as an entry point to like continue a conversation, because I am afraid of human interaction in many ways, and so that is something that I do. But being okay, I'm trying to get to a place where I'm better okay with the silence, and because silence tends to breed depth, right? Depth from the other person, uh, a depth of understanding of for myself, and so that is certainly something that I am keen to do. That's actually I don't know if that's a good place to stop, but that feels very good to me, like as a challenge to folks to say, the next time that someone is relaying a message or a story to you that is not about your lived experience, how can you take a pause, not share, not share, but simply ask more questions and listen better? To me, that's a good challenge.
I like it.
Cool. Well, we're
Listening,
gonna
it's a
figure
good
out
thing.
this whole like beginning, middle, end thing at some point. Um, but
I'll figure out my sound at some
yeah,
point. Hopefully, that point will be next week.
great, great. We will keep on going, and yeah, I'm hopeful that this becomes a nice little tradition for us. So
Agreed.
thanks for hanging out with me tonight and talking some
Yeah.
good stuff.
Thanks for the chat.